Okay. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Today we have Kelly Page, Dr. Kelly Page, I should say, who is the director of Bennett Labs at Bennett Day School. And it also has all these other amazing things going on, which I cannot wait to hear about. So first of all, why don't you tell us about your role, because it's fairly new at the Bennett Day School.
Yeah, so Bennett Day School is a progressive independent school in downtown Chicago. It is a startup that really focuses
Awesome.
on project-based learning and competency-based education. So we are inspired by a Reggio approach to learning. And so in that, there's a lot of innovations that are going on in the classrooms. And our students are working on different projects from pre-K through to grade 12.
Oh, wow.
And so it is definitely a very different type of school to work in, because both our teachers and our students, and by that I mean both the child and the adult, because we honor that both are learners and both are teachers.
Okay.
And yeah, so they come up with all different kind of innovations and approaches to things. And Bennett Labs is actually the research and development or the professional development wing or arm of the school. So we're a learning innovation lab within the life of school. So as opposed to have a separate innovation center or a separate lab that is separated from the academics, we're very much embedded within it. And so I spend a lot of my time working with my faculty and my students to, when they come up with ideas or they have apps or, you know, maybe a different way of doing something, teaching, learning, or what have you, we ideate it and we start to spin it out. And it's really looking at schools differently, and looking at school as not just a place of learning to develop, but also a place of learning to impact the world. So, you know, our children, for example, from kindergarten to grade 2, developed a mobile gaming app with
Amazing.
right, I know, right? At kindergarten, were you helping with app design? And, you know,
No, they have the best ideas. I mean, it makes sense. They're not inhibited by judgment. They don't
yeah.
care what people think, and they have the, craziest, best ideas.
Oh, they have amazing ideas. And when you see them navigate the world,
Yeah.
there's an honesty and an authenticity
Yeah.
in how they do it. And so, you know, it's a great role. And I get to work with very little people right through to older people.
Yeah.
And so intergenerational teams is a key part of that whole way for innovating and so forth. So we have a number of partners. So one thing about our school as well is being independent private, we're also for profit. So we
Okay.
look at different ways that schools can generate revenue to sustain them as an organization, and to invest back into the school, whether it be in grants and scholarships, whether it be in professional development activities. And so, you know, there's a number of innovations in the learning sector over the years that companies have commercialized and made money from, but that was developed by teachers. Or it was developed by students at a school. And so Bennett Day is very much about what does that entrepreneurial spirit look like when you foster it earlier? And how do you actually develop a community of innovators and creatives from your teachers to your students? And so that's my job of helping to foster that innovation culture. And
It sounds like a dream role. You said,
yeah,
it sounds
it
amazing.
is.
Yeah.
It's such a dream role just to be able to have that opportunity to help foster that in very young children to adults.
Yeah. Well, I like that you said that you serve the students, but then also the faculty as well. Because, I mean, realistically, they need help too, especially given everything that's going on right now that we're dealing with coronavirus. Yeah. So they need that help too. And then you said that it's integrated into the curriculum, not separate. Because typically the way I've seen it is that it is usually a separate center. And then if someone's got an idea, you kind of pluck them out and put them in a program or cohort. So say a little bit more about how it's integrated into kind of everyday life there.
So Bennett Day School is a project-based learning school. And so that means that as opposed to have specific classes or subject matter, our students every trimester work on different projects and they develop their skills. So for example, I have one class, our grade 1 class is currently exploring the design and culture of music. And they're looking at it through the lens of math, through the lens of science, through the lens of languages, through the lens of, you know, different approaches. And then from that comes the need to learn coding because they want to develop a website, because they want to host a music festival. And they're working with their music teacher to develop music. And so what happens in that is when they're working on these projects, the innovations come up and are fostered. And so I play a role of what partners need to be in the classroom to help our students innovate further. So our grade 1 students, for example, wanted to, with their music, they didn't just want to put it on Spotify or make it available on a CD, because no one listens to those anymore. But they've looked at the history of music distribution systems, and in grade 1, and so they actually wanted to have an album pressed, an LP pressed. So I went out to find the partner here in Chicago who could actually help our students do that. So by being integrated into the curriculum, it means that it's true innovation. So innovation for me is about turning ideas into impact. And that impact for children and faculty is around learning and development. And they can also, it's all about problem solving. So we are constantly pivoting, being very agile, and having to really look at how might we do things differently. And so that's why it's integrated as part of the programming, as opposed to a separate center that you then go to.
Yeah.
And the classes write me letters, or they write the labs letters, and I get like, Dr. Page, we're working on this. We'd like you to visit our classroom so you can see what we're working on.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah, it's a very, as I said, very integrated. And students then learn not just coming up with ideas, but how do you actually turn them into impact? How do you execute?
Yeah.
Because that's where innovation happens, right? If you don't put your idea in the world, you don't know the impact it's going to have.
Totally.
And so, they learn to build.
I like the design thinking question in there. How might we?
Yeah, totally.
Picked up on that.
Call that the design drop.
Talk a little bit about your background, because I feel like your career really has led up to this role that you have.
Well, it's quite interesting. Very early days of internet and web design, I did my doctorate looking at web knowledge and how we're socialized to learn about technology languages, and especially the gendering of tech. And over the years, I've always had a foot in business and a foot in education, and in different ways. And then I think the journey, so I obviously graduated Australia, worked in Europe, and found my way here to America, where you really have this entrepreneurial mindset. Like even now with coronavirus, we're seeing people pivot and change because they need to. Yeah. So I'm a social design ethnographer by trade. So I go in and I study culture and people, and then really look at the social design of communications or product design, innovations, or what have you. And so the years of experience working in both, business and education has given me the ability to look at our schools through 3 lenses. And it's like looking at school through a learning lens, looking at school through a business lens, like the business model of how we fund schools, and also looking at schools through the development lens of human development. So how are we developing our people, like our faculty? How are we designing learning in the classroom differently? And then how do we fund it all? Because it does not matter that you have this great idea for innovative learning if you can't pay for it. So how can we fund our public schools differently? That is a real big question I want us to explore, because educators often shy away from the money question. And it's an important design in our school systems, especially here in America. So Bennett Day School is definitely a differently designed school. So we're experimenting with what does it look like to design school differently and fund it differently, and therefore, look at it this way. So so my background has really prepared me for this. I think when this opportunity came up, I was very much like, all right, this is the universe.
Telling you to go for it, yeah.
Totally.
So tell me about when you decided to go get your PhD, because when I got my doctorate, nobody in my family even was in academia. I just sort of did it because I wanted to do things a little bit smarter. And I know there was a better way to do things than I was doing them in business, and that there had to be better answers out there. But what led you to go pursue a PhD?
So I was in my undergraduate years at university in Sydney in Australia. And Australia is probably a couple of years behind the US in terms of technologies and innovations in certain areas. And I was working with a market research company and an advertising company on around the internet and the future of the web and the internet. And so I'm aging myself right now.
Oh my God, it's so funny, yeah. Because I used to work on sending letters to the mayor about Twitter, and I laugh about that. Like I would type memos to the mayor saying, Twitter is 140 character. Aging myself.
Yeah, and this was back in 1998. And but I was fortunate I heard there was a professor from America that came to Australia and gave this talk about how it was going to revolutionize the way we communicate. And I had a real fantastic conversation with him afterwards based on what we were seeing in the research company. And he actually invited me to submit a proposal for my PhD, which I did because I was really interested in how we're socialized, not just with and through technology, but around it. And what are the conversations that really influence our learning of technology? And I kind of fell into it. And, but I always have my foot in business still because, for some reason that also, developing that skill set to understand organizational culture and how different organizations are structured and designed. But I fell into it. I did come from an academic family. So my grandfather, my grandfather actually, he had his PhD in agricultural science. And as a child, when I first learned about experimental design, he had an avocado farm and he used to experiment on the trees with certain, not so much they were natural chemicals. I know that's an oxymoron, but it was a natural product to see how it would actually help the trees heal from a certain disease. So I remember as a child, he would write copious amounts of notes of what he was observing.
Ethnography, there's your ethnography, yeah.
So for me, I was intrigued, and I come from a family, we often ask the why question, we're big discussion and debaters. So.
Oh gosh, that's a fun holiday. So is your family in Australia or some of them here as well?
So my family's all over the world, parents in Australia, sister in Los Angeles, sister in London, cousins in Thailand and Indonesia. So it's,
you've got a good global perspective, which is cool.
Yeah, definitely a global perspective.
I love that you say that you fell into academia. So you had no desire to go like the professor route?
I did that for a number of years. So I finished my PhD. And you have to make a choice. You're either going to go academic or you're going to not academic.
Yeah. I'm sort of half in it, but you sort of have to make that choice at some point.
For about 10 years, I moved to the UK. I had postdoc position as an assistant professor in the UK, but I always still had like a side hustle or consulting in business outside. Yeah. And so after a number of years of doing both, I then was like, actually, I'm going to flip the switch a bit. So I've always had that, sort of dual career. And then it was when I was teaching entrepreneurship in undergraduate classes, and I started to see students were getting younger and younger, exploring and interested in entrepreneurship. And I was being asked to talk at high schools and middle schools. And that's when I was like, hang on a minute. This is when they come to us at university level around design thinking and entrepreneurship and innovation. It's not too late, but the mindset, the growth mindset, or the entrepreneurial mindset is already set or not. So that's what kind of inspired me to start, getting into high school and then K-12 and really looking at how do we design learning so that our children are really at that early ages. We have children, as I said, in kindergarten or grade 1, and our culture is of growth mindset. So, it's just a very different environment to learn in. And I'd love to see every school in America have similar culture to what our students have. And that's what we're looking at now. It's been very successful for 6 years. How do we now share how we do things so other schools cannot do it exactly the same, because no organization or school can do things the same, but how can they take what would suit them? Or how can we learn from each other? It's a very, very unique culture that we have at Bennett Day School.
I love that. I'd like to say that I would be a mogul by now if I had that in kindergarten, but who knows? But I mean, when you and I were in grammar school, they weren't talking about that sort of thing. We did have junior achievement, which taught you how to like write checks and pay bills, which I think is useful. But
very useful.
Side.
Yeah, well, fiscal literacy. It's like by our students having to develop products and and often just for our community, it's, they learn the fiscal management of it. And what does it take to actually, the students came up with Miss Judd, who is one of our lead designers at the school, early childhood teacher. They developed a card game to learn storytelling, a collaborative storytelling game called Story Dealer. And the students actually followed it right through the production cycle so that they saw every part of that. And now their product is for sale on Amazon, and they're part of that journey.
That's crazy. Yeah. And it just gives them confidence no matter what they then go do. It's like, I could pretty much do anything at this point. I'm in first grade and I've developed a product that's on Amazon.
Yeah, very much.
I've done nothing with my life, Kelly.
You've done lots of things in your life.
So you also are an entrepreneur. So can you talk a little bit about what you have going on that front? You've got a couple different projects.
Yeah. So I would say I'm probably more of a social entrepreneur. So I get deeply involved in causes and social initiatives that can potentially impact certain social norms that we have in society. I've always been very, very deep in women in tech, environments, and how we are fostering different social norms around technology, not just in girls, but in boys, in how they consider the females as actually the inventors of code and the inventors of so many different innovations and technologies. And so I've been in that sector, and probably about 3-4 years ago, myself and a couple of others launched an initiative called Grateful for Her, which is really looking at the narrative, the storytelling narrative of women. So women, for example, and especially women of color, live in a deficit model of less than. And whether it be being compared to men, compared to each other, compared to social norms, it's always like we're playing catch up. And even our language is often a deficit of less. So Grateful for Her is actually, so gratitude is a healing emotion, and it's also a social connector. So for example, you might do something wonderful for me and I might feel gratitude, but you don't necessarily feel connected to that until I express it. And so I can say thank you, or I could share a story about how and why I'm grateful for you. And that'll have such a different impact on you, because as women also, we don't often share our achievements, the things that we do really well. And so often our friends do it for us, or our peers. And so Grateful for Her is a way to share the story of a woman, either someone you know or someone that is famous, that has inspired you. And you share about their story and why you're grateful for them and how they inspired you. And so over the years, it's been incredible to see how many people have just continued the hashtag Grateful for Her and attached it to, we had a whole campaign around mothers. We had a whole campaign around women in tech, women in science, and people just sharing out about the stories of women they're grateful for, so that we can change the narrative in the media too. And it's lifting us up, not pulling us down. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Just yesterday, I sent a note to my podcast producer and I said, hey, I'm feeling grateful. I just want to say thank you so much. I love my podcast. I don't care if anybody listens to it, if just my mom. I don't care. I love it. And that's actually unlike me to be like that, to open up. I'm working on my vulnerability. And for whatever reason, that feels like a little vulnerable to be that way, which is stupid. I'm not saying I'm right, but but I'm trying to get better about expressing emotion.
Yeah, well, it's when you express it, when you share it, it's a connector, and we often hold it in. Actually, it's when you express it, it actually opens you up even more to so much more opportunity and possibility. So, yeah, Grateful for Her is something that grew out of a number of things I'd been part of, and I also Live What You Love is a social design studio that I started many years ago, working with different companies on how they foster social leadership throughout their organization through digital and social media, and which has now morphed a lot into Bennett Labs. So, as we're growing Bennett Labs into the future. So it's kind of cool.
And I got to see you present on Live What You Love through Creative Women's Co. And it was awesome. Loved your presence. So you've got the tattoo, the heart.
I do.
I actually might steal that because my logo is an arrow, and I'm like, I need some forearm ink.
It is really the amount of times I will just be somewhere and I'll look down and it's a reminder. It's elegantly done, but
it's awesome. I love it.
Yeah.
So the talk that you gave there was super powerful. So that particular topic you probably don't remember, but was about public speaking and like getting worth.
Yeah, being paid your worth.
Yeah, so this is something I've done for like 10 years, public speaking, you know, going to events, workshops for free, which, you know, I'm not saying I deserve the big bucks, but maybe the medium bucks. And so that session was all about that. And you really helped us identify like our purpose, our strengths, our weaknesses, and really our worth in a dollar format, which is important to talk about.
Yeah, so there's a number of workshops I do in that format, which is also around confidence, because self-esteem and confidence, we women often collapse them into each other, but they're very different kind of sensibilities that we have and perceptions of ourselves. And that talk, women around money, is really interesting in terms of how we shy away from negotiation. We shy away for, you know, my dad taught me very young, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. And that's regarding contracts. And, you know, and in doing the studies around women and how much the equity and inequity in pay, it's really interesting to look at not just the industries that we're in because of that, but how quickly we go, no, it's okay, you know, or not charging, when actually a peer and a male peer he'll charge the fee. And so it's really understanding about what is your worth, what is your time worth, what is your expertise worth. And so that, that workshop came out of a number of studies of looking at how women sacrifice ourselves financially, as well as socially, because we don't put ourselves out there. And one great woman, her name's Anne Mallon. She runs a number of health studios called Solid Core, and she is phenomenal. She's a great friend and mentor and peer, and always whenever we talk, we also talk about money, and we put it into the world, and just will discuss different ways or approaches to things. And it's often we women, we shy away from it, yet we need it to sustain ourselves and to grow. It's an investment. So it's interesting.
It's funny about the negotiation. Like I will go full mama bear for somebody else and negotiate the hell out of something for somebody else. But when it comes to myself, I'm like, oh, okay, I'll just do it. Like you said.
Yeah.
So that session that you did was super helpful about that. I'll pull out my sheet and I'm like, oh no, I'm charging this amount.
Yeah. And whenever I run workshops, I'm very big on having the paper worksheets.
Yeah.
Because we do so much digital nowadays. And it's when you write it, when you put it down on paper, it actually gives it a tangibility. You know, it actually, you know, so it's very important part of the methodology.
The other thing you mentioned was that you've been a speaker since a very young age.
Yes. Oh, wow. You remember.
Yeah.
So
I'm fangirling a little bit. So
I did. I was really, really young. I used to get really nervous in front of people. And it was my mum who encouraged me to do public speaking and debating to overcome some of that. Yeah. And at the time, like I liked it and I didn't like it because it was but I learned about what are key debating skills, how to structure certain talks. Yeah. And it's a performance. And so, you know, when I walk out on stage or when I'm in a classroom or when I'm a large group of people, I often say that, you know, that's Kelly who's delivering something, and you take on a different persona. And when you see the science behind it, and the art of really just crafting story, it's you're performing. And, but you need to find your authentic voice in that performance. And so I think very young, I found that. And different forums when you are lecturing to a class of students, versus running a workshop and an ideation workshop to managing a crisis, you know, it needs different sensibilities. So it was probably I'm trying to think, the first time I got up would have been around 10 or 11.
Amazing.
and so now, I'm connected to a number of TEDx events, TEDx Naperville, TEDx Chicago, TEDx Montreal, and working just with coaching their speakers. And it is a confidence thing, but it's also about the story and finding that authentic voice. So I try now to help people when they want it. Like if you wanted to give a talk or you're about to, and you want to run it past someone, by all means, reach out to me. And it's literally, you know, how to find what is the authentic narrative. But I learned it very young. And I will say that looking back, there was a lot of fear there too. You know, to get up. And I did a talk when I was 13 on Salman Rushdie about the pen is mightier than the sword. And as an adult now, looking back and that's very much about Middle Eastern relations and the way war versus, the way we craft story, craft media. It was really interesting. Now I look back on it and I'm like, wow, how did I?
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable. I'm positive that's not what I was doing at 13.
But yeah.
That's a great offer though for people that do want help with public speaking. That's a great, take her up on it. I would take her up on it. I did a TEDx myself, and I used to be deathly afraid of public speaking. I talk about this all the time, that I used to wish I would get into a car accident, which is like ridiculous to even say, so that I could call and be like, oh, I got an fender bender, I can't make it. But I just kept forcing myself. And so then ultimately do a TEDx was pretty amazing. And so I felt like I had the story down. I felt like I had the ability to deliver it. What I didn't have was the performance aspect of it. And so they brought in coaches for us for that, which was cool. It was totally different what to do with your hands. Like if you're thinking happy thoughts, then smile, because you're going to kind of bring that out. Like it was totally different for me, totally outside of my comfort zone, and I survived.
And it's also really interesting when you're public speaking to recognize it's a practice. The more you do it, the better you get. And
now I love it. Now it's like almost like going down a ski hill. Like it's like an adrenaline rush.
Yeah, and it is, and it's like I think the hardest talks I've ever given are when there are so many people that it's hard to focus on, and really get a sense of the crowd because there's too many people with different reactions. The other thing is when, you're mediated. So you're doing a mediated talk and you can't necessarily, I was Skyped into a class I think it was in Greece, and there was like 150 students in an auditorium and I couldn't see them, right?
Oh.
And so there's a combination of things. But I really enjoy it. And obviously helping people do it too.
Yeah, well, you're fantastic at it. So you touched a little bit on some gender stuff. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. One in tech, but then also what you're seeing with the little folks as well. Like, are there little gender differences that you see at a young age with your students? Certainly tech, there's, but I wonder.
I would say yes. I think our children, from even before they're born, they're being socialized into a way of being around gender, and both, their physical gender, their psychological gender. We don't actually allow children much freedom to find their identity on their terms.
Yeah.
We talk nowadays as well about how young people have a digital identity before they're even born, and their parents are starting to frame everything about them. So when children come into our school,
now that you're saying
it's fascinating, but it's also, at what point, parents are now registering domain names for their children's names and setting them up on Facebook accounts while they're and it's an interesting conversation to have with little ones around, as they're starting to form their identity. And at Bennett Day School, being culturally responsive is how we talk about it. We're allowing children, no matter what their gender, their ethnicity, their religious beliefs and affiliation, their family, to be able to start to explore and express what their identity, and creating space for that. So it's all about the language. So we see it with little ones, and it very much depends on their families. But there is also a fluidity that I think is happening and has been happening probably from elementary and middle school students down now, where there is a little bit more of a confidence in expressing identity. And I think because parents now of children in middle school and so forth in certain areas are actually allowing that fluidity and freedom. So they're not as hung up on boys do this and girls do that. It's now there are multiple genders, multiple ways to express yourself. And it's no longer derogatory to say run like a girl. It's actually something now that actually, it's quite empowering in how women express differently. And, the Me Too movement and a number of different social initiatives around women, I think, have impacted that, which little girls and little boys, we have to remember, they both have to be socialized around the idea of self-expression of your identity. It depends on families, depends on many things. But it's an important it's a really important conversation to have. And I still to this day will call people out, and I ask people to call me out on things, because I grew up in country Australia. I grew up in a different generation that and I still also am socialized with certain biases and norms.
Sure.
So yeah. So we have to be confident in how we call each other out, or just bring it to our attention.
Yeah. And then what about women in tech? I mean, we know the numbers are small, obviously, and there's kind of a bro culture in some of the startups. But what else do you see around that?
So I think with women in tech is quite interesting. It's like I'm more concerned around gamification and gaming cultures right now. There is such a low percentage of women in coding and gaming, and that's because of so I think it was in the 80s where there was a change in advertising from major companies in how they advertise technology as being very masculine and more having male-dominated traits. And so that's definitely got a knock-on effect. And I see in schools, gamers, as we call them, start to form groups and clubs to code and develop games or apps together. And often it is gendered. And you have to socially design it in certain ways to be able to disrupt that a little bit. And one school I was at, it was highly white boys that were gaming, and there were two girls who were developing games on their own. And the boys wanted to form a club, and I was like, well, this is our policy on equity and diversity. So come back to me when you have a more representative, student body in your club. So we have to also start to look at that. And I think we women sometimes also aren't our own best friends in this.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's another reason why I did Grateful for Her, because I really want women we're not competing. We're just different. Yeah. Right. And we're all beautiful. We're all smart. We're all in different ways. And when we come together, as we are a powerful force, totally. And we're still socialized, as I said, into that deficit culture of less than. And so therefore, we saw with the Trump, how many educated white women actually voted for Trump. And that was worrying to me because, I'm very much like, what's going on there, given the expression of derogatory comments around women, the harassment of women, like, why is that acceptable in such an iconic leadership role? So we have a lot of work to do, I think, ourselves. And I try and do that work every day. I fail every day too. And it's just been very clear, and in tech in particular, because it's, there's actually lots of room, there's lots of opportunity, yet we often think there's not much funding, so we have to compete with each other for it.
Yeah, or if she gets it, I won't get it. Yeah, it's that scarcity mindset. Yeah.
Total scarcity mindset. And so in fact, it's like, well, actually, if she gets it, she's going to do A, B, and C, and it's going to have this negative, this impact, this positive impact across, all women. So it's like, how can we change our mindset so we're not competing? And, I haven't done much research on that specific thing, but the fight and flight, the survival of the fittest, the Darwinist sort of approach that, no, we're not competing for a mate. We're not competing. Actually, do you remember when the Wonder Woman movie came out? And there's a scene, an opening scene of literally, I think, the general, she needed to go further than she could go on her own. And she yelled, "Shield." And two of her sword maidens kneeled down, and she ran up and she put one foot on their shields together. They were locked in. And the two women stood up and propelled her into the air higher than she could have gone on her own.
I love that.
And yeah, and whenever I think about, let's be a shield for each other, not protecting, actually propelling each other further. And, it's figuring out how you can do that just in your small circle. For some women, it's wider. They've got a wider reach. But let's really think about how we can do that. And so I love that scene in that movie, and I play that for girls, and boys, because it's like, that's how we should be for each other, because men are like that for each other. And it's like, we can do more there, I think. especially in tech.
Oh, you watch that scene now.
Yeah, go watch it. And I remember when I first saw it and I was like, I love Wonder Woman, but the general, yeah, all over it. Any fancy press party, that is who I dress like.
Yeah, her outfit, that's a tad revealing. Yeah.
Well, what can we say?
Yeah. So any advice for young folks that are interested in entrepreneurship or innovation?
Oh, definitely. You know me, I'm like you. It's like, we work in the space. The best advice I ever got given was just get started, right? Just put if you have an idea, start working on it. You don't have to wait till you get a degree. You don't have to wait till you finish high school. You don't have to wait until you've got funding. There's this beautiful concept called bootstrapping. And, if you can bootstrap an idea and work with partners, work with people, just start getting your hands dirty and really developing your idea. The other is really work on your mindset around that growth mindset. I think now it's like after the years of really looking at how I see the world, and when a problem happens or a challenge or coronavirus, right? Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, what's the silver lining? This is a design challenge, and it's a design challenge for all of us, not just a few of us, all of us. So we have to work together. And it helps me move the needle. And so for young people or older people, whoever wants to get into entrepreneurship, know that you actually do have a natural entrepreneurial spirit. You just have to ignite it. Yeah. And, if you have ideas, move it into action. And it could be small actions. It could be like, coming up with a list. It could be reaching out to a partner, building a website, learning code, whatever the action steps are to get made or executed, whatever you need. And I think that's really, often we think entrepreneurs can come up with loads of ideas and never get anywhere because they haven't executed. And I think really the other thing is having a team around you and being aware of your impact on your team. We all have an impact. It's like when you talk and express yourself, it'll impact me. It'll impact others. And so to work in a team effectively, it's not just about you, it's also how your team works. And it's, I just think, and you could probably talk about this as well, the years of experience as an entrepreneur, successful teams are those that have leaders that are driven and passionate about their idea, but also selfless in the credit around that idea, in particular.
That's my favorite thing to do, is to give credit to other people. I don't want to take any credit. Yeah. I'll take the bad, I'll do that part, but I don't want everybody else.
Yeah. So, but just getting started, having a team, and I think you've got to find your tribe. There are a number of people, and especially at these times, right? So there are people you connect with when we're, I'm in Oak Park, we're about to go and shelter in place tonight. Who are my people? Who are my tribe that I can reach out to? I've got a dear friend in New Zealand. We Skyped last night. Two dear friends, one in Rhode Island, one in New York City. We did a FaceTime packed call. There's a famous saying, but I can't remember who said it. You are the sum total of the 7 friends that you hang around the most. Yeah. And that is so true. So it's like, I've probably only really identified that the last 10 years, and as I've started to go, okay, who am I most listening to? Who am I most talking to?
Who do I need to tune out, maybe?
Definitely. Like building boundaries. Yeah. That is such a huge social skill that we don't get taught at school or university or workplace or what have you. Sometimes you've got to go, you know what? I'm just going to build a boundary, and that's okay. Because sometimes people just don't gel well together. I think those things. What advice? I'm going to put this back. What advice do you have?
I agree with everything you said. Yes, I do like the idea of just getting started. I also like the idea of just recording your ideas, because it is a bit of a greenhousing where you could put some on a shelf and come back to them later and kind of nurture them along the way. And you never know which one's going to be like the seed, and which one's going to be the dandelion, and which one's going to be the big beautiful flower. And so I've done that with some of my ideas. Like I go back to them later, because I tend to be the idea fairy that has all the ideas and then doesn't,
Yeah.
put them all into place. So
Yeah.
just getting started, though, is really, really good advice. Because even if you fail, I think it's fine.
Oh,
You
totally.
learn something
Yeah.
and just go back and try again. And I'm on
Yeah.
like, my 47th entrepreneurial adventure, and one was super successful right out of the gate, and then the rest have not been so successful, and I'm okay with that.
I remember one of my very first businesses. It was in Sydney. I was second year doctoral student. I think I had all these ideas, when I was in my early 20s, but and it was a data research company, and I collaborated with another peer, and we got it off and running. I think we ran it for a year and a half, and then we folded it because we went, you know what? Data has now changed. The internet has come in and changed things, and we both didn't have the passion to continue it, and that's okay. But it was
so fast.
It taught me a lot though about, how we design. Every idea teaches you something. And it's like, I didn't know that something that I did 5-10 years ago, or what have you, is now coming back up into my space now. I was part of a team in the UK, actually it was longer than 10 years ago, probably 12 now. And we developed a mobile app, a storytelling app, that was very much, do you remember Her? Do you remember the movie Her?
Oh yeah. With
am I saying
that? Phoenix, yeah.
Yeah, and it was, but that was through your phone. It was actually an app on your phone, and she actually wasn't a personal assistant. She was your counselor, like your relationship counselor.
Yeah.
And but anyway, it was such a formative experience that taught me so much. And then today I'm with my kindergarten kids talking app design, going, sure, so that everything has a connection.
Yeah.
So I think it just rolls into one. No, I don't think nowadays you have that one job for life. We're well beyond that world.
And the entrepreneurial itch does not go away, would be my other thing I would say. If you have it in you, you must pursue it, or you will be miserable.
I have this combination of the entrepreneurial itch, the innovator's itch, the artist itch. I am, I have to paint or create sometimes, and it's lo-fi, it's not on tech, and it's part of who I am. And it's an itch that you have to, you have to scratch it. You got to share it.
Well, good. Well, I love all your advice and experience from turning ideas into impact. So thanks so much for sharing.
Oh, that's my pleasure. Anytime.
Okay.